everybody, I'm Pia from Stitches and Scraps.
Today I'm going to show you how to make this Bluebird Fridge Magnet. Lion Brand was nice enough to give me all the DIY yarn for all of the magnets in this crochet along. For this design I'll be using royal blue, sky blue, white, orange, and just a tiny bit of black. The black is just for facial embroidery, so if you want, you can substitute black embroidery thread instead of the yarn. You will also need a hot glue gun and some glue. I'll be using this Xyron mini hot glue gun that Xyron sent me to review. And you'll need a magnet small enough to fit inside your bird. This one is a 1-inch diameter. You can go probably up to about 1.5 inches without any problem. You do want to make sure it's relatively thin so that it doesn't add a lot of bulk to your bird. Let's get started on the back circle. Start by chaining 2 or making a magic loop and chaining 1. And then work 6 single crochet inside your magic loop or in the second chain from your hook. Join with a slip stitch in your first stitch. And if you made a magic circle, go ahead and pull your tail to close it. For round 2, we're going to work an increase in every stitch. So go ahead and chain 1 to start your round. Now, rather than putting 2 stitches in the same spot for every stitch, I'm going to put the first stitch in the back loop only and put the next stitch in both loops. So I still have 2 stitches going into that stitch, but it's a little bit more invisible of an increase because they're not in exactly the same hole. So let's do that in each stitch around. Back loop only, and then both loops. Now this right here, that's our slip stitch. So we want to be sure not to work into that. So slip stitch in your first stitch to finish the round. And let's move on to round 3. For round 3, we're going to be increasing in 1 stitch and then not increasing in the next stitch, increasing in 1 stitch, not increasing in the next stitch. And we're going to repeat that all the way around. So chain 1, increase in the first stitch, and then single crochet in the next stitch. Increase in the next stitch, so that's back loop only, both loops, and then single crochet in the next stitch. And I'm going to do that all the way around. And then join with a slip stitch to finish your round. For round 4, we're going to increase and then do 2 regular single crochets. So chain 1, increase, 2 regular single crochets, increase, and then single crochet, single crochet. And repeat that all the way around. That brings us up to 24 stitches. We can go ahead and join and fasten off because this was the last round of the back. Let's weave in the ends on our back piece and then we can attach the magnet. My glue gun is hot. I have the wrong side of the back facing up, so the right side is facing down. And I'm going to glue the magnet right into the center. So I'm going to put my kickstand down here. Spread a little bit of glue across the magnet. Be careful of your fingers, this glue is hot. Okay, and then just press it down right into the center of the back. Hold it for a second, and it's stuck. And if you did get any little threads, you can just pull them off now. And then you can set this aside while we work on the front. For the front, I'm going to use the same basic pattern of increases that we used for the back, but I'm going to incorporate both colors. So for round 1, we're using the sky blue. So go ahead and chain 2 or make your magic loop, and then work 6 single crochet into either the second chain from your hook or your magic loop. And go ahead and join with a slip stitch, just like we did before. Nothing new here. Okay, our pattern for round 2 is still increasing in every stitch, but here's where we're going to incorporate the darker blue. So I'm going to chain 1 and only increase in the first 4 stitches with the lighter blue. Then I'll add in the darker blue for the other 2 stitches. So there's 1 2, 3, and 4. Okay, now I'm going to split this increase up. So I'm actually going to, with the lighter blue, do a single crochet in the back loop only. And notice I'm stopping here. I'm not finishing that stitch because I'm going to change colors to the darker blue. And when you change colors, you always do it in this last step of the stitch before. So I have changed to the darker blue, and I'm going to finish this increase by doing a regular single crochet through both loops in the darker blue. Okay, now I'm doing the last increase here in the darker blue. But before I finish the round, before I do my slip stitch, I'm going to change back to the lighter blue to give me a nice seamless look at the join. So there is my lighter blue, and I'm going to join with a slip stitch. So now I still have 12 stitches all the way around, but 9 of them are the lighter blue and 3 of them are the darker blue. So I'm going to keep that pattern as I go, and you'll notice that every time I change colors back here, I'm going to be carrying that other color as a float across the back. That's totally okay. It's going to be hidden by the magnet and by when we sew the back piece on. So don't worry about this float. Just don't make it too tight. If you make it really tight, it'll pinch things together. But as long as you keep it nice and loose, you'll be fine. So let's do round 3. Round 3, if you remember, is increase and then regular single crochet, increase and regular single crochet. So let's do that, but in the color pattern we've established. So chain 1, increase, regular single crochet, increase, and regular single crochet, increase, and regular single crochet. One more time, increase and regular single crochet, then increase, but on the last part of this increase, I'm going to go ahead and change to the dark blue because my next stitch is dark blue. And again, this is going to force the dark blue to cross from here to here. That's totally fine. Just leave that float nice and loose inside. So now I've changed to dark blue, and I've just done an increase, so I'm going to do a regular single crochet. Then I'm going to do an increase. And the last regular single crochet where I will change to the light blue. Again, leaving a float at the back, and go ahead and do a slip stitch to finish the stitch, or to finish the round. Now let's do our last round. Chain 1, increase, then 2 regular single crochets, increase, 2 regular single crochets. Then we end up with an increase here and a regular single crochet where we change to blue. So now to dark blue. So now we've just done 1 increase and 1 regular single crochet. So we have 1 more regular single crochet to do in the dark blue, and then an increase and 2 more regular single crochets. Now you can change colors to do the join, but in this case we're going to be doing the joining of the front and the back together with the darker color. So I'm going to go ahead and do this slip stitch, this final slip stitch, in the darker color. So I'm not changing colors here. So I can go ahead and fasten off the light blue, but I'm going to leave the dark blue attached for joining later. So in order for me to be able to put this down easily, I'm just going to stick a stitch marker in it real quick, and that way it won't pull out on me while I'm working. There we go. Now I can leave it and it won't pull out while I work. Now let's do some eyes. Chain 2 or make a magic loop, and in your magic loop or in your second chain, we're going to do 2 single crochets, and then a slip stitch, okay, then 2 more single crochets, and then another slip stitch. Now you can join this with a slip stitch, but I'm actually going to do a more invisible sewn join. So I'm tightening up my magic loop. I'm going to cut this yarn and I'm leaving enough of a tail to sew the eye on with. And to make this join just slightly more invisible, I'm going to come in under this first stitch, okay? Pull this yarn through, this tail, pull it through. Then come back down into the stitch I just made, right up through the center of it, okay, right there, and pull the yarn through that way. And that creates a nice seamless join on top. I have a whole separate tutorial for that if you'd like to see it, and I will link to it in the description here. So those two slip stitches on the side made our eye just slightly more oval, and that's what we're going for. Now we make a second one, but this time we don't need to leave a long tail. Because the eyes are so close to each other, you can use the same tail to sew them both in. Now let's make our nose. We're again going to do a magic loop or a chain 2, and this time we're only going to work 2 single crochet into it. Tighten that up to a nice point. Then we're going to chain 1 and turn, and work an increase in each of these 2 stitches. Now I want to add a little bump on the top of my nose, so I'm going to turn, I'm going to slip stitch in the first stitch, okay? I'm going to single crochet 2 together in the next 2 stitches, and then I'm going to slip stitch in the last stitch. And that gives me that sort of rounded shape at the top. So I'm going to fasten off, and again I'm leaving enough of a tail to sew the nose onto the face. And there is our nose with its nice rounded top. Now it's time to assemble the face. First I'm going to weave in these 3 blue ends that I don't need. Then I'm also going to weave in all the extra ends on the eyes and the nose. Remember, I need 1 long tail on the nose to sew it in, and 1 long tail on one of the eyes, which I made on the first eye, to sew both eyes in together. Everything else I'm going to weave in. With all the extraneous ends out of the way, we're ready to sew our facial parts on. So find the point of your nose where you started, and find that curve at the top. And this is the position your nose is going to go in when you sew it on. So place that in line with the top of this first round. So right where you see the blue changing, the top of your nose should cover that blue change there. Now I'm also being careful to center it so that it looks sort of straight coming down here. If it's a little bit crooked, that's okay, but I want it fairly straight. So that's going to be where my nose is. So I'm going to sew that down with, I'm going to use a back stitch, but you can use a running stitch or whip stitch or whatever you feel like. I prefer the back stitch because it's more hidden and doesn't bleed over the edge at all. And it feels very secure to me. So I'm carefully turning this upside down because that's the position that works for me. And I'm going to maintain this pointed shape as I go, so make sure I don't let it flare out. I'm going to go down into the blue, and then up a little bit ahead, okay? But I want to make sure I maintain the pointed shape, so I'm coming up near the center and then into that, okay. Now I go down right at the beginning, right where I first went down pretty much. Whoa. Watch out for your free yarn here. Okay, got that untangled. Let's make sure I still have my position right. There we go. So now for a back stitch, I go up a little further and then back a step. So it's like 2 steps forward, 1 step back. So 2 steps forward and 1 step back. Now I'm going to find right that very point there where I want that, make sure it's still nicely centered, and then grab this point right at the end here. Okay, and one step back. All right, so that's one side of the nose. Now I come up the other side here, and I'm maintaining that point right there. So I'm going to go a little bit forward and then back down to the very point right here. And notice I'm gathering the orange to make it really come to a point at the bottom there. There we go. Now, before I finish this off, if there's any parts I don't like, I can make a little stitch to kind of bring it in. So this is sticking out a little far from me, right? So I'm actually going to try to come up here underneath this little bubble that I've got here, right there. Pull this up right there. And then sew it back down into the middle slightly. So I'll come around it and go down more into the middle there. There we go. So I am happy with that shape of the nose, and now I'm going to weave in this tail at the back. Now let's do the eyes. So the eyes go on either side of the nose and overlap just slightly, just like that. And then we sew those down into place. And again, you can use pins to mark your spot if you need to. So the eyes have an oval shape to them, and I want the long edges to be more up and down. So these are the short edges, that's the long edge on this eye. And that sort of cradles the nose as well when you do it like that. So again, I'm just going to backstitch this time around each of these stitches on the eye. Okay, that's my first eye done. Now I'm just going to travel over across the back to sew in this other eye in the same sort of position, this time right here. So both my eyes are sewn in, I'm happy with the position, and I'm going to weave in the white tail. Now to finish the eyes, I'm going to add some black eyeballs. So I've cut about an 18-inch length of black yarn, and I'm going to just weave the tail of it in on the back so that it's secure. And then we're going to make the first eyeball. I am going to use a French knot. Not one of my favorite stitches, but it's perfect for this situation. And I think I'm going to put it right there, right in the center of the eyeball where we started. So right there. So to make a French knot, you pull it up through where you want it. You wrap the yarn around your needle like that. I'm going to go 4 times, okay? And then you insert your needle back down through a spot right near where you were. I'm going to go down a little bit. There we go. And all of those wraps will bunch up and form a little knot. There you go. So that is one eyeball. Now I'm going to make my other eyeball. Just come across and come to the same position here. Okay. Wrap the yarn 4 times. You want to make sure it's the same number of times as you did on the other eyeball so they're even. And bring it down. I went down just a little bit on the other one. And I'm holding this yarn in place so that the wraps don't get loose until they've pulled all the way through. And there we go. Now I have my 2 eyeballs. Now finally, just to accentuate this V shape here, I'm going to add a little V shape marking, basically like an eyebrow across the eye. So I'm coming in here and down here. Okay. Then I'm going to go across here. Right there, 1 stitch across. Each of these stitches is only 1 stitch. And come across back to where I was in the center there. And that just helps to accentuate this curve a little bit. It's not very visible. It's just a shadow almost, okay? So again, on the other side of this center stitch here, oops, that pulled that too tight. There we go. Okay, diagonal up along the side of the eye, right to there. And then horizontal, just one stitch across the top of the eye. Right there. And I feel like that shadow, it's not absolutely necessary, but I feel like it really adds some intensity to the eyes. Now I can do the same sort of shadow under the nose, but because it's on the light blue, I want it to be a little bit lighter. So I'm going to split my black yarn into its component threads. There are 4 threads in each of these. So what I'm going to do is right down here by the base, I'm going to stick my needle into the yarn so that 2 threads separate from the other 2. And there we go. And then you can just pull and they will slowly come out. You have to keep untangling where they get tangled up here, but just pull. Basically, you're unspinning the yarn. And when you have enough, you can even just cut it off if you don't want to keep playing with it. But now I have 2 separate strands of yarn that have 2 plies each, 2 strands each in them. It's the same way you would split embroidery floss if you were using embroidery floss. So now with my single strand of yarn, I'm going to come down and do a light shadow under the nose, just here. And here. So it's almost buried underneath the nose there, but it just gives it a little bit more definition. You can also put in little nostrils. You can keep doing this kind of embroidery as much as you like. On this, you just don't want to overwhelm it with black, but a little bit of embroidery really adds a highlight to it. So I can put in these 2 tiny little nostrils that are almost buried, but it just gives that slightest shadow that makes a difference. That's a little too buried. Let's dig that up a little bit. There we go. I pulled it a little too tight. So just the tiny little nostril. This is in the wrong spot. There we go. And our bird face is done. Now we can weave in these remaining ends and then we'll join the front to the back. The magnet is going to go on the inside, so make sure that you have the right side of the back and the right side of the front facing out. And for it to look prettiest, we want the front on top. So you want to be looking at the front while you're working it so that this becomes the right side. So go ahead and put this working loop back on your hook. Now the back has no features, so it doesn't matter how you line it up. Just pick a stitch and chain 1, okay? And then what we're going to do is we're going to chain 1, slip stitch in each stitch around, lining up the front and the back together like this, so that the two layers get joined together. So slip stitch, chain 1. In each stitch around, there should be the same number of stitches on both the front and the back. You should have 24 stitches. And when you get all the way around, you can fasten off and weave in your last blue end. So the last thing to do is add a little tuft at the top of your bird's head. You need one piece of each of the blue colors, no more than a couple inches. Longer is just easier to work with, but you actually won't need more than half of this. So fold it in half to form a loop, and then you're going to stick your hook down, and I like to go not necessarily right near the top, but a little bit lower, okay? Stick your hook in and pull this through to the top. Just the loop part, don't lose the ends, because now you're going to drape those ends over your hook and pull those ends through the loop as well. Okay, and this is going to be your tuft. Now you see why I said to sit it a little bit lower, because that way it ends up in line, this little bubble ends up in line with the rest of the stitches. And then all you need to do is trim off each one of these ends really close to that little knot that you just made. Right about there looks good. And then to flare it out a little bit, you can use your needle to actually pull those ends apart, just like we did when we did the black embroidery. Mix them up a bit. And there's your little tuft. And now our little bird magnet is finished. If you enjoyed this video, please give me a thumbs up, share it with your friends, or leave me a comment. You can also subscribe to my YouTube channel for more great videos. Thanks for watching.